the end of a small life and the beginning of another. Maru, County Limerick, November 16, 1907. The autumn wind moved softly through the hair and veils of the little cluster of black-clad mourners gathered about the open grave. The small coffin had but just been committed to the earth, and now only the low whisper of the breeze and an occasional muffled sob disturbed the stillness of the churchyard. Father Doyle, having performed his solemn duty, moved along the line with gentle murmurs and the clasp of a cool hand, yet even as he spoke the words of consolation proper to the occasion, his thoughts strayed, not unkindly, to the comfort of the rectory fire, and to the prospect of hot tea and a fresh pie awaiting him there. The day was raw, and he felt the chill in his bones. Daniel Brennan stood somewhat apart. At 46 he was still a tall and powerfully made man, his broad shoulders bowed now beneath a grief too old to be new, his full black beard stirred faintly in the wind as his brown eyes drifted, unwillingly, to the two small crosses standing near the fresh mound. 13 years they had stood there, the twins, one who had drawn breath for only 3 hours, and the other who had clung to life for 3 brief days, and now little Catherine lay beside them, 2 years old and carried off by the cruel grip of pneumonia. A dry, persistent cough broke through his thoughts. Daniel lifted his head at once. There, gathered close about their mother, stood the remainder of his small flock. Bridget looked worn, more worn than her 38 years should have allowed, yet the auburn of her hair still held the soft glow that had first captured his heart, and her clear green eyes, though reddened now with weeping, had not lost their brightness. She gave 7-year-old Aiden a brisk thump between the shoulders, the practical gesture of a mother long accustomed to tending many small ailments. Daniel crossed the short distance to them and put his arms around his wife. For a moment she leaned into him, and then, as though by silent agreement, the family turned together and began the slow walk homeward, leaving the quiet graveyard behind. At the head of the subdued procession walked Daniel and Bridget with their sons, Jacob and Daniel the younger, 15 and 12 respectively, both already broad of shoulder and sturdy in limb, promising in every way to grow into their father's likeness. Close behind came Jacob's twin sister, Bridget, never far from her brothers, following them with steady, sensible honor, her calm presence gathering the younger boys, Connor, Declan, and little Aiden, about her like a small orbit. At 17 she bore herself with a gravity beyond her years, much of the household already rested quietly upon her capable shoulders, though in her private heart she nourished ambitions that stretched further than the narrow boundaries of cottage and hearth. As they walked, Daniel reached for his wife's hand and held it firmly. "It's time now," he said quietly. She did not ask his meaning. They had circled this matter many times in the long evenings, the advertisements, the letters, the whispered talk of America and land for the taking. Always Bridget had refused. She would not leave her old mother in Maru. She would not leave the 2 small graves on the hill, and now there were 3. She said nothing, but her fingers tightened faintly in his. That evening, in the dim light of their small, sorrow-shadowed cottage, Daniel gathered the 7 children about the rough wooden table. From his coat he produced a small, carefully kept box and opened it with deliberate ceremony. Out upon the table he spread the contents, yellowed advertisements and neatly folded clippings saved over many patient years. "Look here, children," he said, his voice gaining a quiet energy, "there's land to be had, fine land, for the taking, land we can farm ourselves." From another pocket he drew a worn purse and emptied its modest but hard-earned contents, coins and a few precious notes, beside the papers. "I've money enough for the passage," he continued. "I'll go first, with Jacob and Daniel. We'll build a house and work the land, and when we've saved enough, we'll send for the rest of you." The children leaned forward eagerly, their grief, for the moment, softened by the bright and dangerous thing called hope. They pressed on her to read the papers aloud, for she alone among them possessed the smooth confidence of proper schooling, gained at Glenstall Castle alongside the daughters of the great house. Mr. Long, the house tutor, had once remarked, not entirely under his breath, that the girl might have gone very far indeed had Providence made her a boy. Honor read carefully, her clear voice filling the small room. By the time she finished, the younger ones were bright-eyed and flushed. "We'll build you all a castle," Jacob declared boldly, striking his chest with youthful pride, "finer than Glenstall Castle itself." Laughter, fragile but genuine, flickered through the room, only Bridget did not join it. She stood apart in the shadowed corner, watching her husband and children with a stillness that was almost prayerful. Slowly her gaze drifted to the small window. Beyond the dark fields, the church tower of Maru stood against the deepening evening sky, and in the quiet of her heart she knew, with the certainty of the rooted in the grieving, that she would never leave this place. Not while her mother yet lived, and not while her 3 little angels lay sleeping in the cold earth of Maru, the fairy prince. Maru, County Limerick, September 12, 1911. The sun shone kindly over the small village of Meru, laying a gentle gold upon the thatched roofs and whitewashed walls. It was a morning of uncommon sweetness. From the forge came the ringing music of the blacksmith's hammer, from the schoolyard, the bright, untidy chorus of children's voices. The soft scent of late summer, warm grass, damp earth, and the faint promise of harvest, drifted easily through the air. From the narrow garden behind the Brennan cottage, a small figure slipped quietly through the crooked gate and paused to look about him. Finding the world safely occupied elsewhere, he darted across the lane and vanished onto the little path that wound its secret way toward the woods. Aiden Brennan kicked idly at the pebbles as he went, his bare feet brown with honest dirt and entirely unconcerned by it. He laughed softly to himself, a private, companionable sound, for he was bound for his own particular kingdom hidden deep among the trees. In one hand he carried a fishing rod of uncertain reliability, in the other, a somewhat bruised apple, already bearing the marks of several impatient bites. He had gone but a little distance beneath the green canopy when he heard them. They called him in voices as soft as thistledown, "Aiden! Aiden! Come and play with us!" He slowed, his bright eyes searching eagerly among the leaves and foxglove bells. Yes, there! Small movements, quick bright flutterings, they were there, peeping and beckoning. With a delighted cry he broke from the path and ran headlong into the long grass, weaving between bushes and slender tree trunks. Faster and faster he went, breathless with the joy of it, and then, quite suddenly, the ground was no longer beneath him. He hovered, a startled pair of mice fled squeaking to their hole, and a flurry of birds rose in indignant protest as Aiden flew lightly past. The wind rushed sweet and cool through his hair and along his small body, and, oh wonder of wonders, he could feel it stirring the delicate wings that had sprung, as naturally as breath, from his back. Below him the common stones of the path shimmered and changed, turning to diamonds and sapphires and deep red rubies that flashed in the sun like scattered treasure. The glittering trail led him onward to a place of enchantment. There the stream ran clear as glass, tumbling from a small waterfall that seemed itself to be made of light. Jewels winked from moss and bank and shallow pool, until the whole place shone like the inside of a story. Aiden descended gently onto a broad flat rock that stretched into the middle of the water. He settled himself comfortably and looked about with deep satisfaction. They were coming now. From behind leaves and blossoms they emerged, his bright companions. Some drifted down from the branches overhead, others circled him in airy dances, their laughter like the faint chiming of bells. Aiden gathered up a small whistle fashioned from reeds and put it to his lips. A merry tune sprang forth, thin, sweet, and brave, and above it rose a song, clear and lilting. In what marshy meadows, a tattered piper strays, ragged, ragged Aiden, on thin reeds he plays. He asks for no payment, he plays, for delight, a tune for the fairies, to dance to, at night. A little procession approached him then, very solemn for such tiny folk, bearing a crown woven of leaves and late flowers. With great ceremony they placed it gently upon his head, and again the song rose, softer now. They nod and they whisper, and say, looking wise, a princeling is Aiden, for all his disguise. Aiden bent forward eagerly and peered into the clear mirror of the stream to admire his royal reflection. For a moment he smiled, then the smile wavered. The face that looked back at him was not that of any fairy prince, it was only Aiden, brown-haired, big-eyed, his nose a little stuffy as ever. Something warm gathered suddenly in one eye. The first tear fell, it struck the water and spread in widening rings, and as the ripples moved outward, the reflection changed. Now he saw the cottage bright with lamplight, his mother and father laughing together in the easy days before worry had settled upon them. Another tear fell, Daniel and Jacob racing him down the road to school. Another, Bridget and Honor catching him up in fierce tickling embraces. Another, snowballs flying, Connor shouting, Declan tumbling, little Katie sweet, brief smile. The images came faster now, blurring and shifting, his mother's goodnight kiss, his father's great warm hug, the three boys whispering and wrestling in their shared bed, Honor and Bridget whirling him breathless in some wild kitchen dance. At last Aiden lifted his head and scrubbed fiercely at his eyes with the back of his hand. The fairies were gone, of course they were gone, they had never truly been there at all. He could not fly, he could not speak with fair folk, he was no hidden prince, he was only Aiden Brennan of Meru, and, as it seemed to him just then, the loneliest boy in all the wide world. Quietly he reached for his abandoned fishing rod and the half-eaten apple lying on the warm stone. With careful seriousness he baited the hook and cast the line into the slow-moving water. He ate the apple in thoughtful bites while he waited. His thoughts wandered, unwillingly, to the schoolyard and Todd McCoy's jeering voice. To the narrow bed at home where his mother lay coughing through the long afternoons. To the empty places at table where, one by one, the others had vanished. Father! Daniel! Jacob, Bridget, Connor, Declan, even Honor to Dublin. The rest gone across the ocean in search of the bright new life they had promised. Who was to stand beside him now against the McCoy boys? Who was to lift him up and call him brave? Who was to make him laugh? There was only his mother, thin and distant in her sorrow, her thoughts forever wandering among the small graves on the hill. He waited for them every day. He was strong now, quite strong. Next time, surely, he would pass the doctor's examination. Surely! At length Aiden rose. No fish had troubled his line. His stomach gave a small, hollow complaint as he turned toward home and followed the narrow path back through the trees. He was nearly clear of the wood when a faint, merry note drifted after him. He turned quickly. There, perched upon a trembling leaf, sat little Ragged Robin, raising his tiny whistle in cheerful salute. Aiden's face brightened. He lifted his hand and waved back. Yes, he would come again tomorrow. He would sing with them, dance, and play, and perhaps, in some quiet, secret way, he would yet become one of them. After all, he was the fairy prince. The letter. Dublin, March 29, 1912. Spring had come early to Dublin that year, though it was a shy and uncertain visitor, more given to pale sunlight than to warmth. Along the quays the Liffey moved in its slow, indifferent fashion, and the city, busy, smoke-streaked, and faintly weary, carried on much as it always had. In a narrow upstairs room overlooking a respectable but unremarkable street, Miss Honor Brennan sat at her small writing table, very straight-backed, very composed, and very much at work. She had arranged her life in Dublin with the careful economy of one long accustomed to making small means serve large purposes. By day she was a clerk, punctual, neat, and quietly efficient. By evening she became something rather more daring, a writer of modest articles and improving tales submitted under a sensible masculine name, for the world, as she had early discovered, listened more readily to men. And when there were still hours left to the night, she tutored the children of respectable families in English and history, her clear voice and patient manner winning her steady employment. Most of what she earned went faithfully westward to Meru. It had always been so. That morning the post had arrived in the usual modest bundle, circulars, one thin newspaper wrapper, and a single letter addressed in a hand she knew at once. Lady Elizabeth Barrington. She paused. There was, for the briefest instant, a tightening in her chest, a small, instinctive warning, though she could not have said why. Honor broke the seal carefully. She read, and then she did not move at all. Honor Brennan had long ago schooled herself in composure. Life in the small tenant's hut outside Meru had offered little indulgence to softness. She had been the clever one. The private tutor Mr. Edward Long at Glenstall Castle had discovered that much soon enough, once he had looked past the worn hem of her dress and the country awkwardness she had worked so hard to smooth away. Under his instruction she had excelled, reading, writing, figures, history, all of it taken in with the quiet hunger of a girl determined not to live and die as her mother had done, worn thin by poverty and childbearing. For a time there had been bright companionship too, dear Lady Elizabeth Barrington, who had first drawn her into the wider world of books and proper speech. Though their paths had parted with the years, their letters had continued, steady and affectionate. Honor had built her life, piece by careful piece, upon purpose, and now, her hand trembled, only once, then she read the letter again, more slowly. Your poor mother passed quietly last week, there was no one but Mrs. Hennessy and the priest, the boy Aiden has been taken to the workhouse in Limerick, I thought it best you should know at once. The room seemed suddenly very still. Outside, a cart rattled past, somewhere below, a door closed, ordinary sounds, the world proceeding with its usual lack of ceremony. Honor folded the letter with great precision and laid it upon the table. For a long while she sat without movement, her green eyes fixed upon nothing at all. Bridget Brennan was dead. Mother, who had once filled the Meru cottage with brisk commands and warm bread and tired, tender kisses, was gone into the same cold earth that already held the three little ones. And Aiden, poor, bright, dreaming Aiden, in the workhouse. A slow breath moved through Honor's chest, though it did little to steady the sudden hollow that had opened there. All at once the careful arithmetic of the past years rearranged itself before her with merciless clarity. Father, Jacob, Daniel, Bridget, Connor and Declan were all in Minnesota now, and Aiden, left behind with Mother, now alone. Very deliberately, Honor rose from her chair. There was, she knew, no time now for sitting still. She crossed to the small washstand and splashed cool water upon her face, pressing her lips together firmly as she did so. When she lifted her head again, the familiar composure had returned, not untouched by grief but steady by purpose. It was the Brennan way. She moved back to the table, drew a fresh sheet of paper toward her, and dipped her pen. There were letters to write, arrangements to make, and a journey, she suspected, very soon before her, for whatever dreams she had once entertained, of journalism, of classrooms, of a life shaped by her own choosing, one truth stood plain above the rest: Aiden Brennan was not to be left to the workhouse. Not while she still drew breath. The Empty Cottage, Maru, County Limerick, April 2, 1912. Honor Brennan came down from the cart at the edge of Maru in the thin grey of an April afternoon. The village lay much as it always had, modest, wind-brushed, and quietly enduring, yet to her eye everything seemed faintly altered, as though time had moved on in her absence with unnecessary haste. She did not pause in the village street, her steps turned at once toward the narrow lane leading out to the little holding where the Brennan family had made their long and difficult stand against the world. The hedges were beginning to green, a rook called somewhere overhead, otherwise, all was very still. Honor walked quickly. She had told herself, during the long journey from Dublin, that she must prepare for change. That absence, especially the long, hard-working absence she had given to Dublin, must of necessity alter things at home. Still, when the cottage came into view, her breath caught, the door stood open, not in welcome, in possession. Two unfamiliar figures moved about the small yard, a woman shaking out a length of coarse cloth, and a man examining the low stone wall with proprietary interest. The cart stood nearby, heaped with the ordinary goods of new tenancy. For a moment Honor remained very still in the lane, then, with the quiet dignity that had carried her thus far in life, she went forward. The woman saw her first. "Can I help you, miss?" Honor's voice, when it came, was steady, though softer than usual. "This was my family's cottage." The woman's expression shifted at once to the particular discomfort of one who finds herself standing upon another's sorrow. "Ah! You'll be Miss Brennan then? Father Doyle said you might come." Might, as though grief kept appointments. Honor inclined her head politely. She did not step past the gate, there was nothing for her there now. The churchyard lay under a pale wash of sky, the grass still damp from the morning's rain. Honor entered quietly, her gloved hands folded before her, though her eyes were already searching. She found the place easily. The three small crosses stood together, just as she remembered from that bitter November years ago, and beside them, the fourth. Honor stopped. For a long moment she did not move closer, she only stood, her gaze fixed upon the plain wooden marker, upon the careful lettering that bore her mother's name, Bridget Brennan, beloved mother. The spring wind moved lightly through the yew trees. At last Honor stepped forward and knelt. She did not weep, not then, that would come later, perhaps, when she was once more alone. Instead she laid her gloved hand very gently against the rough wood, as though greeting someone long absent. "So," she murmured softly, "you would not leave Maru after all." The wind answered her and was still. She found Father Doyle in the small parlour of the presbytery, where a modest fire struggled bravely against the lingering chill of the season. He rose at once when she was shown in, his expression already heavy with the sympathy of one who has had too much practice in delivering sorrow. "Miss Brennan," he said gently, "you have had a hard journey." Honor inclined her head. "I should like to know about my brother, Father." The priest hesitated, only briefly, but she saw it, and understood. He gestured for her to sit. "It was a hard winter for them," Father Doyle began, folding his hands carefully. "The boy, Aiden, he mended well enough after his illness, strong little fellow, in truth. Many a country child had carried heavier burdens, but none had been meant for shoulders so small." Honor's fingers tightened slightly in her lap. "And my mother?" The priest's eyes softened with real regret. "She faded, Miss Brennan. Quietly at first, she took to the bed more and more, ate little, spoke less, her mind was much with the children gone before her." Honor said nothing. "So he went on, by last year, by the summer of 11, the lad was mostly left to himself. He did what he could, poor creature, tried to keep the place, tried to tend her." A faint colour had risen in Honor's pale cheeks now. "He was only 10, she said." "Yes." The single word fell heavily between them. Father Doyle cleared his throat gently. "The money you sent, it helped for a time. He could pay the rent, but sickness eats through savings quickly." The boy began spending his days in the woods, fishing, gathering what berries and nuts he could find. He kept the two of them fed as best he might. Honor's composure held, but only just. In the autumn, the priest continued quietly, he began missing school, more and more. There were complaints. Honor's voice was very calm. "What sort of complaints?" Father Doyle looked into the fire. "Fruit gone from gardens, vegetables missing from kitchen plots, nothing large at first." Honor closed her eyes briefly, and then? "A loaf of bread," the priest said softly, "taken from Murphy's bakery." The silence that followed was a long one. "When he was caught," Father Doyle went on, the authorities had little choice, as they saw it. With your mother failing as she was. The board guardians decided the home situation was untenable after the incident and ordered his admission. The boy was removed by the relieving officer and sent to the workhouse in Limerick. Honor rose, very slowly. When she spoke, her voice was steady again, but there was iron in it now, where before there had only been weariness. "Thank you, father," he stood as well, troubled. "You mean to go to him?" It was not a question. Honor met his gaze directly. "Yes," she said, and in that moment, for the first time since her arrival in Maru, there was something in her expression that was almost fierce. "Aiden Brennan has been alone quite long enough." The Workhouse Boy, Limerick Union Workhouse, April 3, 1912. The workhouse stood on the edge of Limerick like a thing apart from ordinary human mercy, a long, grey sprawl of stone and narrow windows, severe in its purpose and unashamed of it. The high walls kept the world out, the world, for the most part, was content to be kept so. Within, the days passed with a heavy sameness, the bell rang, the children rose, they worked, they ate, if such thin fare might properly be called eating, and they slept. Aiden Brennan, aged 11 years and some months, moved through this routine with the wary quiet of a small animal that has learned too early to conserve its strength. This morning he was in the outer fields again. The April wind moved cold across the open ground, tugging at the coarse workhouse jacket that hung loosely from his narrow shoulders. The soil was heavy from recent rain, clinging stubbornly to the blunt hoe in his hands. Around him, other boys bent to the same weary labor, their movements slow and mechanical under the watchful eye of the overseer. Aiden worked. He always worked. There was little else to be done. At first, when they had brought him here from Maru, the place had seemed too large, too loud, too full of strange rules spoken in sharp voices. Now it was merely grey walls, grey food, grey days. Education, such as it was, came in brief and in different portions, a few letters scratched upon a slate, a lesson half heard before the next call to labor. Aiden, who had once run laughing toward the Maru schoolhouse beside his brothers, now found the letters slipping away from him like minnows in a stream. There was no time for learning here, only for work. As he bent again to the stubborn earth, his thoughts, which were rarely still, drifted backward along the narrow road of memory. They had left one by one, he could mark it clear as stepping stones across a river. In 1908, his father had gone first, Daniel Brennan, tall and certain, taking with him the two great pillars of the family, Daniel and Jacob, bound for the far-off place called Minnesota. They had promised letters, promised land, promised that the rest would soon follow. Aiden had believed them. He had been 8. Then, in 1910, had come the second great leaving. Bridget, Connor, and Declan, bright with the terrible excitement of children who half understand departure, were carried off under Uncle Thomas's anxious supervision when at last the long-saved money had been judged sufficient for passage. Aiden remembered it with painful clarity. The great ship had loomed at the quay like some vast iron certainty, breathing smoke into the grey Irish sky. There had been bustle everywhere, trunks thumped down, voices calling, handkerchiefs already half raised in anticipation of tears. And he had stood very small and very still beside his mother. They had not passed the doctor. He could still see the brief, brisk shake of the man's head, still hear the quiet finality in the word no. His mother's hand had tightened painfully around his fingers then, though she had said nothing at all. Beyond the barrier his brothers and sister had been swept forward with the moving crowd. Bridget had turned once, only once, her face pale but shining with hope. Connor had waved wildly. Declan had shouted something Aiden could no longer remember. Then the distance had widened, the great ship had taken them, and he and his mother had been left standing on the cold stone quay, the wind off the water tugging at their clothes, watching until there was nothing left to see. It was, Aiden sometimes thought now, the first moment he had truly understood how a family might come apart, not all at once, but piece by piece, like something quietly breaking in the night. He had not cried then, he had been determined to be brave. Honor had stayed, dear, steady, who always knew the right thing to do and the right way to say it. Honor, who had named him the Fairy Prince when he was little. She had gone to Dublin for work, yes, but she had not truly left him. Her letters came, her money came, her careful, hopeful plans came folded in every envelope. Aiden had held fast to those. For a while, the wind shifted across the field. Aiden paused, straightening slightly, one hand pressed briefly to the small of his aching back. It had been in 1911 that everything had begun to come undone. He himself had grown strong again after the sickness, quick enough on his feet, sharp enough in the woods, but his mother had faded. Day by day she had lain more quietly in the narrow bed, her eyes turned inward toward memories he could not follow. Some mornings she scarcely rose at all, some days she did not speak, so Aiden had done what needed doing. He had tried, God knew he had tried, he had swept the floor, fetched water, mended what small things he could manage with clumsy fingers. When the money from Honor ran, and it did, quickly, he had turned to the woods, fishing in the stream, gathering berries, nuts, anything the hedgerows would yield. He had learned which orchards were poorly watched, which gardens had loose gates. By autumn he had scarcely gone to school at all. There had been no time, no choice. The shout of the overseer snapped him back to the present. "Mind your row there, boy!" "Yes, sir," Aiden muttered quickly, bending again to the work. The day he had taken the bread from Murphy's bakery returned to him now with painful clarity. The warm smell of it, the desperate hollow in his stomach, the sudden rough hand on his collar. After that, events had moved very quickly, too quickly. He had not even properly understood what was happening until the workhouse gates had closed behind him with their dull and final sound. A rook called somewhere beyond the walls. Aiden lifted his head for just a moment, squinting toward the pale strip of sky visible over the far buildings. He wondered, not for the first time, whether Honor knew where he was, whether anyone did. Of his mother he thought less often now, though sometimes, in the thin space between waking and sleep, he could still see her lying very still in the dim cottage bed, her breathing soft and far away. No one had told him she was gone. In his mind, she remained there still, waiting. The bell rang again, harsh and echoing. The boys straightened in weary unison. Another portion of the day was done. Aiden Brennan wiped his muddy hands against the rough cloth of his trousers and fell into line without a word, his small face set in that quiet, watchful expression that had become his chief defense against the world. He did not know that even now, miles away on the Maru road, his sister was coming for him with all the determined force of her careful, steadfast heart. For the moment, he was only what the workhouse had made him, a thin, tired boy of 11, working, waiting, and enduring. That night, after the bell had long since ordered silence, Aiden lay wakeful upon the narrow workhouse cot. The dormitory smelled faintly of soap, damp wool, and too many tired boys breathing the same thin air. Somewhere in the darkness a child coughed, another turned restlessly in the straw mattress beside him. Aiden did not sleep. The moon had found its way through the high window and lay in a pale square upon the floorboards. It was there he saw the movement, very small, very quick. Aiden held his breath. From the edge of the moonlight, as lightly as a drifting seed, there stepped a tiny figure in ragged green, no higher than the span of Aiden's hand. He carried, as ever, the little reed whistle tucked beneath one arm. Ragged Robin, the fairy gave him a most solemn bow. For one wild, hopeful instant Aiden's heart lifted, the old woodland warmth rushing back so suddenly it almost hurt. "You came," he whispered, scarcely shaping the words. Ragged Robin only smiled, a bright, knowing smile, and raised the whistle to his lips. No sound came, or if it did, it was too soft for workhouse walls to carry. The small figure gave Aiden one last cheerful wave. And then, like breath upon glass, he was gone. Only the pale moon square remained. Aiden lay very still for a long time after, but his mouth had softened at the corners, just a little, and when at last sleep came, it was the gentlest he had known in many months. The hand that came back, Limerick Union Workhouse, April 4, 1912. The matron had been reluctant, Honor had expected no less. Even now she stood very straight in the narrow administrative corridor, her gloved hands folded with outward calm, though her heart had been beating too fast since she first passed beneath the grim arch of the workhouse gate. "He is in the yard just now," the woman said at last, with the weary air of one long accustomed to sorrowful visitors. "You may speak with him, briefly." Honor inclined her head. "Thank you," but the words cost her something. The yard was cold despite the pale spring sun. A thin wind moved us along the hard-packed ground where the children stood in loose, subdued clusters. Honor saw him at once. She would have known him anywhere. He was thinner, painfully so, and the workhouse clothes hung ill upon his small frame. There was mud at the hem of his trousers and a tired set to his shoulders that struck her like a physical blow. But it was Aiden, her Aiden. For a moment she could not move, then she crossed the yard. "Aiden," he turned, and for one suspended heartbeat he only stared at her, as though she were some trick of the light, one of those half-remembered fairy visions that came and went in the lonely hours. "Honor?" he said. It was scarcely more than a breath. She was kneeling before him then, she did not remember crossing the distance, and her hands were on his thin shoulders, careful and trembling all at once. "Oh, Aiden! My poor little lad!" At that, the brave stillness in him broke. He flung himself forward with a small, choked sound that seemed torn straight from the lonely months behind him. Honor gathered him close, one hand cradling the back of his head as she had done when he was very small. "I waited," He whispered into her coat. "I waited for you to come." "I know," she said, her voice unsteady at last. "I know, darling boy, I am here now." For a long moment neither of them spoke. The yard, the other children, the watchful matron, all of it seemed to fall away. At last Aiden drew back slightly, though his small hand remained clutched tight in the fabric of her sleeve. "Is ma'am?" he began. Honor's composure, so carefully held these past days, gave way, just a little. She smoothed his hair gently, her green eyes shining now despite her efforts. "Oh, Aiden," she said softly, "ma'am has gone to rest with the little ones." He stared at her. The meaning came slowly, then all at once, a small, broken sound escaped him, and he pressed his face hard into her shoulder again. This time Honor did not try to keep her own tears back, they fell quietly into his hair as she held him. They wept together there in the cold workhouse yard, for Bridget Brennan, for the lost years, for all the hard small griefs that had brought them to this place. When at last they were calmer, Honor rose and turned at once to the matron, her voice firm despite the lingering tremor. "I have come to take my brother home." The matron's expression shifted into the familiar mask of institutional regret. "I am sorry, miss. The boy is a charge of the union, proper release must be arranged through the Board of Guardians. It cannot be done today." Honor's fingers tightened. "But I am his sister, his nearest family present in Ireland." "I do not doubt it," the woman said, not unkindly, "but the rules are the rules." For the first time, real steel entered Honor's voice. "Then I shall return tomorrow," and return she did. The next morning the workhouse officials found themselves confronted by a rather more formidable delegation than they had anticipated. Miss Honor Brennan stood composed as ever, beside her stood Mr. Edward Long, older now, certainly, but still possessed of that quiet authority which had once ruled the schoolroom at Glensall Castle with such efficient success. And with them, Lady Elizabeth Barrington. She had grown into her title with grace and certainty, and she carried both now into the workhouse office like a gentle but unmistakable tide. The presence of Lady Elizabeth appeared to smooth difficulties that might otherwise have lingered for weeks. Matters, after that, moved with remarkable speed. By afternoon the necessary papers were signed. By evening Aiden Brennan stood outside the workhouse gate and cleaned second-hand clothes that Lady Elizabeth herself had insisted upon purchasing. He looked dazed. Honor took his hand. "You are coming with me now," she said gently. "Where?" he asked. A small, determined smile touched her face, the first in many days. "To America, if all goes well." Mr. Long cleared his throat quietly and pressed something into Honor's gloved hand, a small, folded packet. "For the journey," he said. Lady Elizabeth added softly, "You must not refuse us this, Honor." Inside the packet lay the means for more than mere survival. Inside the packet were 2 steerage tickets, passage on the White Star liner Titanic, calling at Queenstown on April 11th. Honor's fingers trembled only once this time. She closed her hand firmly around the future. Beside her, Aiden looked up, still uncertain, still fragile, but no longer alone. Honor gave his hand a gentle squeeze. "The Titanic," Aiden whispered. "The last farewell. Maru, County Limerick, April 7, 1912. They came back to Maru under a sky the color of pearl, the air soft with the early breath of spring. It was not a long stay they intended, only what was proper, what was needed, yet to Aiden it felt as though every step along the familiar road stirred ghosts from the hedgerows. Honor walked beside him, steady and composed, her gloved hand resting lightly at his shoulder whenever the path grew rough. Neither of them spoke much, there was too much to be seen, and too much to leave behind. Grandmother Ryan was living now with Aunt Catherine in a cottage not unlike the Brennan hut had once been, low-roofed, smoke-scented, and bravely kept against the world with more care than means. The old woman wept when she saw them, not loudly, her strength was long past that, but with the quiet, trembling grief of one who has outlived too many. Aunt Catherine, practical and kind-eyed, bustled them in at once. "I saved what I could," she said gently, and brought forward a small, carefully wrapped bundle. They opened it together at the narrow table. There was their mother's brooch, the modest one of dark metal and worn stone that Bridget Brennan had fastened at her collar on Sundays. A few photographs followed, the Brennan family in brighter days, Daniel standing broad and proud behind his wife, the children gathered in uneven rows, half solemn, half ready to fidget. The wedding photograph lay beneath them all, Bridget young, Daniel hopeful, a lifetime ago. There were small things too, the sort that mean nothing to strangers and everything to those who remember. A chipped china figure, a ribbon box, the little blue vase that had once stood proudly on the Brennan shelf. Honor touched each object only briefly, but her fingers lingered on the brooch. "That was Mom's best one," Aiden said softly. "I know," Honor replied. The churchyard was very quiet when they came to it. Spring had begun its gentle work among the graves, small green shoots pushed bravely through the damp earth, and the yews whispered softly overhead. They stood together before the 4 small crosses. Honor removed her gloves, Aiden took off his cap. For a long moment neither spoke, then Honor bent and laid the brooch carefully at the foot of their mother's cross. "We are going on now, ma'am," she said, her voice low but steady, "but we have not forgotten." Beside her, Aiden swallowed hard. "Goodbye," he whispered. The wind moved lightly through the grass. Father Doyle received them with genuine warmth, though his eyes were gentle with concern at the sight of Aiden's thinness and Honor's drawn composure. "You are bound for America, then," he said. "Yes, father. You are a brave girl, Honor Brennan." She inclined her head slightly. "I have had good instruction." The old priest smiled at that, though there was moisture in his eyes when they took their leave. "God go with you both," he said softly. Their last call in the village was Murphy's Bakery. The bell over the door gave its familiar small jangle as they entered, and the warm, yeasty scent of fresh bread filled the narrow shop. Aiden's hand tightened unconsciously in Honor's sleeve. She said nothing, not a word. She simply stepped to the counter, laid down the proper coins for a loaf, more than proper, in truth, and inclined her head politely to Mrs. Murphy behind the desk. Then she turned and walked out again. Only when they were well down the street did Aiden understand. He said nothing either, but he stood a little straighter. At the edge of Meru, where the road began its slow turn toward Queenstown and the waiting ship beyond, Aiden paused. "They'll be about," he said quietly. Honor gave him a small nod. "I shall wait here." They came in 2s and 3s, the boys of Meru, curious, awkward, half ashamed of the business of farewells. Even Todd McCoy hovered at the back for a time, scuffing his boot in the dust. Aiden faced them squarely. "I'm off to America," he said, trying for boldness and nearly achieving it. There were mutters of surprise. A whistle. One of the smaller boys grinned. "Bring us back something grand, then." Even Todd gave a rough sort of shrug. "Mind you don't get lost, Brennan." It was, from him, the nearest thing to peace. Aiden nodded solemnly all around. "Goodbye, then." When at last he turned back to the road, Honor was waiting. "Come along, Fairy Prince," she said softly. Aiden looked once more toward Meru, toward the woods, the school road, the distant church tower standing faithful against the sky. Then he slipped his hand firmly into hers. "Yes," he said, and together, at last, they turned toward the road that would carry them away from Ireland, and toward whatever new life waited beyond the sea.